message back there that it's time to start. So we'll jump on here and get going. You probably picked up on the fact that I'm here. That means Tom's not. Martha and Tom were blessed with their second grandson. Rachel gave birth to Thomas Fisher, and he was, if I get this right, Alice can correct me, he was 20 inches long, 6 pounds, 12 ounces, and everybody is doing well. Now, I say everybody is doing well. James Curtis, their oldest one, who is 7, came down with 102-degree temperature. He's at home, they're at the hospital, so they're trying to figure out how they're going to keep them separate when they get together. So they're a little concerned about that. I think he's just throwing a fit. You know, little brother, you know. But they're doing well. And so I think they will be there till about the middle of next week, something like that. But just to give you an update, everybody is doing well. So, any prayer requests in here? Now, we were just talking about Israel. I'm going to lift Israel up as a prayer request. I think we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We're instructed to do so. And I think during all that has been going on, it has made me realize, as I looked at praying for the peace of Jerusalem, I was not praying just for Israel. I felt like I was. But then I realized Jerusalem is definitely, obviously Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and then others that don't share any religion that are there. So when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we are praying for something much larger than that. And you all may know that and have known it all along. It was kind of a new awareness to me. Sometimes I'm a little slow to catch on to things. So I want to be sure everybody has these, because if I don't, Tom will fire me. I won't let him do that. All right. Any other prayer requests? Mary Finch. And she's in assisted living? Okay. Okay. Any others?
My husband goes Thursday for his another PET scan, and we're hoping that the cancer's still dormant.
Okay. Very good. Anything else? Well, Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot. Ask you to lead us in prayer. Sure. Can we start this one?
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this beautiful morning you've given us. Thank you for the opportunity to gather in your house, Lord, and read your word and study your word. Thank you for Brother Jesus today. Guide and direct us in all we do. Be with our prayer requests. Be with the unspoken. Lord, we know you're in control. Your will be done, Lord, and we thank you in advance for what you're doing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So I'm going to try to pick up with where Tom left off last week, and that's going to mean I'm going to ask you all some questions to see what you can recall that he said. He was finishing up, I think, talking about Isaac being a type of Christ, and he was giving some examples. In what ways might Isaac have been a foreshadowing of the coming of Jesus? As a sacrifice, as an atoning sacrifice. And we're not even really quite sure what the sacrifice of Isaac was supposed to be atoning for, but it was to be a burnt sacrifice, which was always an atoning sacrifice. So that was there. What else?
I told him, take your son, your only son.
In the chapter 22, it doesn't just say it once, but it says it 3 times, that this is his only son. I'm going to stop and ask for a second. This is a prophetic reason that it's given. Was Isaac his only son?
He was the only son of the promise.
Only son of the promise, only son of the covenant. That was the only one there, but it was not his only son. And so we can see the prophetic application being used here, because in fact, it was not his only son. And so we can see how God is giving a prophecy through this. What else? Your son whom you love. What did Abraham put on him to take to the sacrifice? He put the wood on him, which, of course, Christ carried the wooden cross. So we see there a piece. I'm sorry, Nancy, you were saying? He willingly went. Tom said he was about 17. I personally think he was older. It doesn't really matter. Abraham is how old? 117. You're real safe. Just say over 100. We know. Now, if you're going with a person that is 135 years old and you're 17 and you don't want to do what the 135-year-old wants you to do, what are the chances that a 17-year-old can overpower and get away with it? It's there. And so he could have done that, but he did not. He went willingly. Did Jesus struggle with going to the cross? Or did he just go without a concern? He struggled. He said, if you can take this cup from me, do it. But not my will, but yours. And so we see in both cases, there was the ability not to do what they were being called to do, but they were submissive to it. Is submission an easy thing to do? In all of my life, my own will, I like to be in control. I'm sorry, just the way I am. I like to be in control. And that is the biggest battle I have fought my entire life, is not being in control. Alice is giving me that look. I think that was agreement, but I'm not sure. What else? Any other thoughts you have about Christ and Isaac? Do you know where they were going? Mount Moriah. Why might that have any significance to Jesus? Tom kept referring to Calvary. I think he also mentioned Golgotha. It's the Mount of Olive area. This is the area in which Moriah covered. And so they were going to the same place. It's also where David bought the threshing floor, which served as the land for the temple. And so we just continually see how it's all tied together. Of course, Christ explained that temple was going to be torn down and built back up in 3 days. And he was referring to that stone temple, correct? He was referring to himself as the temple. And so we see a transition in that as well. And there are other elements that we see as going through here, how Isaac and Christ have a pattern together. Looking at this is occurring somewhere around 2050, roughly, just say that. So roughly 2,000 years since recorded creation, the history of the world, 2,000 years. 2,000 years after this very strong prophetic exercise is played out. And by the way, it was played out with Eve as well. We're going to have the serpent is going to bruise the heel and crush the head. Now you're 2,000 years after that, talking about Christ 2,000 years later. So you can see how these things are hitting major milestones, even in the actual, in what in front of it is in front of us. So there's a lot of similarities tying all this together. And so we've gone through this whole history of Abraham and Sarah. We get to the point of having this sacrifice of Isaac and God providing a lamb to be there. And so you get this big story build up. God provides, the lamb is there, and then they come down. Who comes down from the sacrifice? They both come down, but who gets together and they leave? Abraham with his servants. It does not mention Isaac. It doesn't say he didn't, but it doesn't say that he did. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm a 17 to possibly 30 years old and my dad just almost put a knife to me to sacrifice me, I may have needed a few moments alone to think it through. It may have been time that he spent with God. I honestly don't know. It doesn't tell us. And so your mind has to kind of fill in blanks if it wants to fill in blanks. But you've got this period that he doesn't come down, and it's just Abraham and his servants that go back. After all this big and this huge crescendo, we then come to what is the first part? Verse 20? Is that what James? Verse 20. And then we go into this next piece. So I'm going to ask you to pick that up and read that next section.
Now it came about after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel, and the father of Aram, and Shesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jilph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Ramah, also bore Teba and Gaham and Nahash and Makkah.
Good news is that's the worst that we will have to read anything at all. I'm sorry. Chapter 22, verses 20 to the end of that chapter. Yeah. This is one of the things. God understands us, and he said there's no way they're going to keep up with these people. We've got to give them names they can remember. When you're looking at this, again, the story of Sarah and Abraham, and now Isaac and his miraculous birth, and now this sacrifice is taking place, and now we're talking about Uz and Buz. What the heck happened? How did this get sandwiched in here, and why is it there? There's a shift, a big shift to
The church.
To what?
The church, Rebekah.
Okay. It's going to Rebekah. I'm glad you said, when you said church, I thought, how's she getting there? I told you Isaac didn't come down the hill with them. At least it doesn't seem to show that. He's disappeared. He doesn't reappear until several chapters later, and when he does, he comes back for what purpose? To take a wife, to get Rebekah. I'll make sure y'all all have these, so there you go. You don't have to share. Oh, you get my go. Right there. So he doesn't come back, doesn't reappear until he comes back for his wife, his bride. Now, when does Christ come back? Because after his ascension, where is he? But he's not coming back until he's going to come back for his bride. And so we see another similarity taking place there as well. So the whole thing about Buz and Uz is really talking about Rebekah, and it's a shift. Now, Rebekah will not come up for another 2 chapters, but it's being brought up here just to lay the groundwork for that, and I think to serve as a comma in this return for his bride. And so that's the reason for that part. I'm not really going to go into a whole lot more about that little Buz and Uz thing because it's kind of out of place except for that message about Rebekah. And that's the whole part of it. And that carries us over into 23, Genesis 23, and which would be today's lesson. I wanted to finish up where Tom left off because he'd be upset with me if I didn't cover everything he had. So I'll make sure we did. He doesn't get upset. That is the calmest guy I've ever seen. Unless maybe you're playing ball, that may bring out the little competitive side in him. All right, so let's look at verses 1 through 2.
Chapter 23, verses 1 and 2. Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her.
So to pick up on some things Tom has been doing over and over again, in verse 1, we find a first. Do you know what that first might be? Weeping is a first. Abraham, that's in verse 2, though. We're going to come to that in a second. In verse 1, how many women in here want me to tell your age? Her age is told. Now, not only is this a first, it is an only. It is the only time in all of Scripture that a woman's age is given at the time of her death. That does it for many men, but it only does it this one time for her. She is mentioned more often through the Scripture than you might think. She appears in Isaiah as an example of godliness. She appears in 1 Peter as a model for women to follow. In Hebrews, in the list of people of faith, she is listed there as a woman of faith giving birth. We are given reasons to hold her in high esteem even more than Mary was. Now, anybody with a Catholic background would really struggle with what I just said. But it's true. It's just factual. She is mentioned over and over again. I just gave you a few examples of how she is lifted up. It is I think it's in chapter 17 that God referred to her as what? Princess. And so we find over and over again how she is held in high esteem. Why might that be? No, all that he put her through. What in the world could Abraham have put her through? Once? Twice. He did it with Pharaoh and Abimelech. He's dumping her off as his sister, and as Tom likes to put, that's a half-truth and a whole lie. She was his half-sister, but it was a complete lie. She was his wife. That's how he needed to present her. But he did it anyway. And so you've got that issue. What else? Wanting a child, and especially in a culture that is really what you're doing, and to be promised, for Abraham to be promised all of these nations, and you don't have a child. So she went through that. What else? I thought for sure you would jump on this. All the moving around. I thought about you when I was looking at it. I'm going, yes, they moved constantly as they do this. At this point, they're in Hebron. Where were they the last time we saw them? Beersheba. That's where they had been. That's about 20 miles. I always have to get myself squared away, northwest of Hebron. So they had to had to come down. So they've moved again since the time of the sacrifice. Yes? They are, but what is Abraham being promised? Land. And yet, does he have any land? All right, this is really interesting, and it'll play more into the discussion that takes place. He doesn't have land, and yet they've moved all over the place, and Sarah had gone with him. She didn't say, hey, we are moving too much. Find a place, put it down. She didn't say, at 90, yeah, it's a good time to have a kid. She didn't seemingly hold a grudge about the times he has tried to pass her off as his wife, as his sister. So there's a lot here about Sarah that really we need to look at and go, that is a wonderful, remarkable woman, because I don't know how many of you all would put up with that. And I'm looking at the women, not the men. She did bad things too. She was not perfect. Abraham was not perfect. In fact, the only one we find that's perfect is Christ. Everybody else, and that's what I love the Old Testament. And a lot of people look at me and go, okay, for an evangelical Christian, what do you mean you like the Old Testament? Because in the Old Testament, God works his plan out through a bunch of really broken, evil, sinning people. So I have a chance, you know. And so that whole thing begins to run through us, and we see that. And you're right, she was not perfect. But at the same time, neither was Abraham, and she certainly brought out the best in him in that part. So the first thing we see is the first and only time in Scripture it occurs, her age is given. The second one is that Abraham weeps. It's the first time that crying is ever spoken of in the Bible. The first time. It's not the only time, but it's the first time that takes place. And so we have that occurrence that goes on. All right. Let's look at my notes here. Also in Galatians, Paul identifies Sarah as an illustration of grace. Oh, we've covered all kinds of good stuff. That's great. How long do you think they were married by the time Abraham goes in and sits on the bed and cries for Sarah? Any thoughts? Over 100 years. When you look at Bible scholars, they all have opinions. I think most of them must have been attorneys in a previous life. The shortest period is 65 years. The longest seems to be about 112 years. But somewhere in that span, and I think you're right, somewhere around 100 years. Alice and I have had the good fortune of having been married 45 years this summer. We can start and finish each other's sentences. It drives our son crazy. He goes, why don't you don't let the other one finish? I said, we don't have to. We aren't. At this point, I think we have the same tastes and things. There's a whole lot that we have. And I have to say, she has made me a better person. And that's not always the case with the spouse. But I can honestly say that. There are others in here that have been married a long time, but I'm not going to try to guess. But it's so it is amazing to do that. And you think about the grief that you would have at the loss of a spouse. It would be overpowering, and some have gone through that, and so they know exactly what I'm talking about, and I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't gotten there. But in another 60 years, we'll hit that mark, and then boom. Okay, so he is sitting there, he is crying, he is grieving, which would make sense completely, and then he begins to move forward. There was Tom put a little story in there, and I won't go into it. Actually, I think he may have had a video. I can't remember. But Warren Wiersbe was an author and a pastor who died, I think, in the mid-'80s. I think that's right. And then he had been in a conference or some kind of meeting with Vance Havner. Vance Havner was a scrawny little old man, but he was also a pastor and an author. I think he probably wrote more than he spoke. I don't know. It was before my time. I don't have to worry about that. They were at a conference or a meeting, and Dr. Havner had lost his wife. She had passed. And so Warren Wiersbe went up and just wanted to express his sympathy. He said, "I'm sorry you lost your wife." To which Dr. Havner looked at her and said, "If you know where it is, it's not lost." And so he had security in knowing that she was with Christ. And so that was a very interesting event and a unique way to look at it. But in many ways, I think Abraham did the same thing. Tom mentioned, I think last week, that in Hebrews, it touches on the fact that Abraham believed in the resurrection. He believed beyond the grave. And so he knew that Sarah was with God, and that had to be very comforting. Had to go to a lot of funerals over the years, and I have been sad, but then at times I realized I don't know that any of the people that I lost that I had a real question about where they were. And I would hate to think that I had to go to a funeral where the loved one had not accepted Christ. That would be true agony. And so that's something that kind of sits in the back of my head with some of my relatives that still have not accepted Christ. But Abraham did believe that. He knew that she was still with Christ or with God. Alice and I were talking about this last week. I don't know how much Abraham knew about the things that he was talking about or prophesying. Now, Tom said that God had talked with him, and maybe he had revealed the entire gospel. I have my doubts. I think he only told Abraham what he needed to know, and the rest of it, Abraham was having to act on his own faith, not with knowledge. I know Christ is coming. Don't want to get into eschatology, but I don't like any of the timelines that are sitting out there. People put out. It doesn't really tell us that. It just says he is coming, and these things will happen. And Jesus said, look for them as signs, and a lot of them are early signs. Some of them may be late signs. It's not going to matter. And given historic record of people, I'll probably die before them. Just given my past life, I'm just going to have to, it's going to catch up with me. But it is what it is. So in a twinkling of an eye, I'm going to be with God, one way or the other. Now, the difference is, it'd be nice if Alice and I were just walking down the road and both of us just disappeared and there was no sympathy and no regrets, no anything that took place. Probably won't happen that way, but it could. And it doesn't really matter to me. I know the promise. And so I can just rest in that. If anybody sits here and tells you on this date or that date is going to happen, immediately know they don't know. Because if Jesus didn't know, that person's not going to get the message. I mean, it's just not going to happen. I do think, though, we need to be wise and look at the things around us to know that things are coming to an end. Now, what is an end? My personal belief is that we're at the end of a 6,000-year period. It's got to be coming to an end. That's just my belief. Now, where does that 6,000-year end and the 7,000th year begin? I don't know. Because there's calendars, believe it or not. Calendars, don't believe any scientific evidence put in front of you, because there's somebody playing with it behind it. It's called God, and he can move it around any way he wants. So our calendars don't all mesh up. They're close, but they don't mesh up. That's correct. One of the few times, Alice and I talk about that too, that Passover and Easter aren't together. But it's exactly for that reason. Also, that if you believe the writings that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is that the Essenes believed it should be on a solar pattern and said it was before. But the rabbis had taken it in a different direction, and that is it was based on a lunar, which is why they have that catch-up time in there. Well, those 2 years are off. They don't match up. And the longer we go, the farther they get apart. So you've got that issue. And then they don't follow their own calendar because they had a Jubilee year when they were supposed to give everything back and resolve everything and have 1 year of every seven, not even doing anything with the ground. They didn't do it. And in fact, it's those years that made up the 70 years that they were in captivity. And so we've got a lot of things that are taking place. God uses real numbers to do what he wants to do. Our challenge is to understand what real numbers he's using and to have that insight. Even in our calendar, has it ever changed? We've had changes in our own calendar that have taken place. In fact, I think it's hold me to this, the 1788 Prince James, not King James, had a calendar in there, and it had a 13th month. But the 13th month was only a day or two, and it was to do the same thing. It was to deal with leap year and to get everything reconciled. So as late as the 1700s, you had this issue of going on. So 1600s. So you had that all taking place. I chased a rabbit there that I have no idea why I did that. I was going to go, the next thing I was going to mention was, where were they when Sarah died? We've kind of mentioned it. Hebron. Anybody know where Hebron is? It's one of the, in the land of Canaan. It's one of the oldest cities that we know its location from eons ago to today. It still exists. It's in the West Bank. I think it's about 30 miles from Jerusalem. It's in this area of the West Bank, controlled by a Palestinian authority group, but under Israeli occupation. I think we already touched on this, but did Abraham own this land? No. Was Abraham promised this land? And so we're going to see everything that takes place here on out is Abraham acting on a promise. And then he has to do it in a way that we wouldn't necessarily think. But the land had been promised. And so that's where we pick up with this. Let's look at the next, I think 3 verses, 3 through 6.
Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead.
I've been in contract negotiations almost all my life. It started out because I would go with my father. He was an AFL-CIO negotiator, and I would actually go and sit in the meetings just because my mother needed some relief. So I'd go with him, and I got introduced to win-lose negotiation. I talked to my father about a win-win contract, and he looked at me and said, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, which was kind of hurtful to hear from your own father. And he goes, do you ever watch the Super Bowl with the intent of ending it in a tie? Okay, there was some truth to that, but still I also understood the strength of a win-win negotiation. Abraham asks for what? What type of property? A burial spot. And he gets a negotiation response. What is that response? What do they think he wants? They want? Okay, he lifts him up and acknowledges Abraham's strength, his stature. But what else? Am I getting ahead of myself? Y'all are all looking at me like I'm... I'm also deaf.
Pick the choicest of our
Okay, you can have the best one. Now, what's the price going to be? Yeah, just going to give it to him. How many negotiations have you gone into it where you didn't have to pay anything for what you were going to get? When something sounds too good to be true, that's right, it's not. And so that's not going to take place. And so Abraham has, now when he was with Sodom, you remember that he was offered payment for all that took place, and he rejected it. He said, not even a shoestring. Abraham has come to the point that he realizes he doesn't want to be beholding to the people that give him things. Where is Hebron? Where did I tell you it was? Somebody said it also. In Canaan. And who was promised Canaan? Abraham. So this is a promise of God. So why doesn't he take him up on it? It's because those people are still there. The Hittites are still there. And the Hittites own this piece of property. And so I want to look back again. There's something I think I'm missing here. No. All right. So let's go on to he does acknowledge that he's a stranger and a foreigner in that land. He's admitting that. Now, was that spiritual? That we are sojourners on this earth and we don't really belong to this world, we belong to God? Or was it he was acknowledging, I'm in the land of Canaan, I haven't earned it, it is promised to me, but I'm still a foreigner in it. All right, let's look at verses 7 through 11.
So Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and approach the Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, even in all who went in at the gate of his city, saying, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead.
All right, so I said I've been in negotiations, contract negotiations, all of my career. And there's always those niceties that take place at the beginning, shaking hands, talking about family, where did you go to school, what type of business have you been in, all that kind of good stuff. That's basically taking a bow to the other person. It's being courteous and setting out the situation that's going to be there. And then they start into the negotiation. Now, Abraham had not read the art of the deal, and he was not taking a Trump approach to how to negotiate. But let me just ask you all, how do you go in and try to buy something from a person, not from a business, but from a person? Maybe he'll take less. You'll get a price and think I can come in a little less than that. That's the normal negotiation process. And so you're expecting that to happen. But the only problem is the person making the offer is offering it at what price? You think. Now, what do you know about, or what stereotype have you heard about market negotiations in the Middle East? You don't want to be beholding. What do they love to do? Bargain. They love this. I mean, they like to give and take and mess around with it. And there's some of that here. Now, you have to have done contract negotiations to know that there's something taking place. He's asked for a grave, and that grave is at the end of this land. And the offer comes back as what? Take it. But not just take the grave, take it and the land. So the negotiations had already started. I don't want just that cave. to sell to you. I want to sell you that cave and the land. And now Abraham is having to buy more than what he was doing. He was just describing it. It's a cave at the end of the land. Now you're going to buy the land and the cave. But nobody wants to throw out a dollar figure. Nobody wants to begin the negotiations. But Abraham makes it very clear that he's going to buy this. And so it continues on, this discussion and truly a dance. When you first read it, you're going, what is all this stuff? It's back and forth, back. It's almost like Buzz and Uzz. You know, why is this here? Well, it's laying some groundwork for something that's taking place. Let's pick up with, I think the next one is
12 through 18.
Yeah, let's do that. That's more than I really want to do, but let's do 12 18.
And Abraham bowed before the people of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if you will only please listen to me, I will give the price of the field, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my lord, listen to me, a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. So Ephron's field, which is in Machpelah, which faced Mamre in the field, and the cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border, were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went in at the gate of his city.
When you're negotiating with somebody, how many people are present? Maybe two. You may actually have a witness, maybe have an attorney present, whatever, but it's a small group. Where is this one discussed? City gate. Now we know business is transacted at the city gate, but this is a very public transaction at the public gate, at the city gate. People are present. And you got all this bowing and standing and all this formality of what's the one complaint about governmental contracts? Waste. We might see that here, but okay. Waste. What else? There's always the argument that it's not transparent. We can't see the details. Well, this was about as exposed as it could get. It's in front of everybody. There are all these witnesses sitting around hearing the transaction that can hold them accountable for how this is going to take place. And so Ephron makes an offer, and that offer is still, I'm going to give it to you, but he does finally give a dollar figure. He says it's going to be 400 shekels of silver. I don't quite know what a shekel of silver is. I'm going to also admit I don't really know what the value of silver is, so I don't have any idea what we're talking about. But depending on who you listen to, what theologian you read, some say it is possibly as much as 10 times, he stated, 10 times more worth than it was done. I keep bringing up Trump. This guy was inflating the value of the transaction that he was offering to give away for free. Now, I don't know if there's any tax write-offs or whatever taking place, but the offer is being thrown out there. So you get this thing taking place. There's also the mention, the field had what on it? Trees. When you think of the Middle East, do you think of a lot of trees? And if you do, you think of very scrub brush type trees. If the trees were on the field would have been worth more than if it was just an open field. So when he said it was at the cave's at the end of the field, I want to get the cave. The guy goes, well, you can have the cave, but you're going to take the field. And the field's got all these trees. So maybe it actually was worth the 400 shekels of silver. It's really not the point whether he had overstated it or it was actually worth it. Abraham did not ask for the field. So he was going to be paying more than what he should just because of the conditions. implications of it. And so he sits there and he has this offer made to him, and Abraham says, no, 250 shekels and half the field. He says, okay, let me weigh it out for you. And so he agrees immediately with the offer, no negotiation, no anything. He's willing to buy it. When he does this, does Abraham own any land? For the first time, we see that he owns land. It's only the land to bury his wife. But now, in the city of Hebron today, they have the grave of the patriarchs. It's still there. It is revered by Jewish people, by Christians, and by Islam. Who do you think is buried there? No. Rebekah and Isaac. So you get Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their first wives that are buried with them there. It's still there, and it's still celebrated. I think that's interesting, that this first piece of property bought by a who would eventually be Hebrew, he's not Hebrew at this point, by the Hebrews, this is their first plot, and it's to bury. But it is a piece of land. Getting back into politics just a little bit, because I can't completely divorce my mind of it. There's a chant being said right now about the land of Israel. What is that chant? From the river to the sea. That is a Palestinian chant to own the land from what river? What? No. From the Jordan to what sea? Mediterranean. So, where's the land of Israel set? Between Jordan and so we know what they're talking about. Now, Abraham was shown the land and told what it was. It really wasn't until Moses that we begin to get the boundaries established, and that's in Deuteronomy in several places, and then Joshua involves it as well. It's also from the river to the sea, and that river is Euphrates. It goes from the Euphrates River to the sea. It touches almost all of Iraq, or half of Iraq, the southern part of Syria, the southern part of Lebanon. It picks up most of Jordan, all of the West Bank, Golan Heights, and Gaza Strip. It touches a little bit of Saudi Arabia before it grabs just a piece of Egypt. And so you've got this huge area. Do they have any control over that piece of property I just described? Have they ever had control of that piece of property? Never. Solomon owned the largest portion of it, and even then it didn't expand at that distance. But that was the land of promise as established and given the boundaries. We need to realize when we talk about prophecy, we live in the promise. We don't always realize it. And so Abraham has a gravesite. That's all he has purchased in this land. But he bought it in a promise. What do you know about when people die? Where do they carry their dead ones? To the family plot, typically to the family land. She was from Mesopotamia. You would think they had taken her back around to probably Iraq to bury her, but he doesn't do this. Abraham acts on a promise, and that is to put her in the land of Canaan. And it's not even the land of Canaan that Israel has today. It is an act of hope, an act of promise. It's declaring what God says is, even if I can't realize it. And in fact, I think it's in Hebrews that it speaks to that. Hebrews 11:13. It says, these all, talking about all the people of faith, it said, They died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. That was all the people listed of faith, not just Abraham. And so that's what Abraham is doing here. He is putting a flag down saying, this is our property, this is our land, and yet it hasn't been possessed yet. It will never be possessed up until this date. At some point, it will be. I don't know if that's in the millennium kingdom, if that is I don't believe it is a heavenly spiritual realm. I believe it is a physical possession at some point, and we're living in that promise, and so we need to know that. We live in a lot of promises that God has given us, and we need to claim them and live there rather than trying to always think it's off into the future. It's at our door. Tom gave a bunch of true and false, and I'll touch on those. We've kind of hit it at different times. But true or false, Abraham and Sarah had smooth sailing in their marriage. False, and I think we've already touched on all those different things. We didn't mention Hagar, but we got that as well. We didn't talk about the trouble of two children, Isaac and Ishmael, but that was there as well. I think Tom has alluded to it, so I don't think I'm getting ahead of him, but I'm going to go ahead and jump out a little bit. It's at this plot of land, at that cave, where Isaac and Ishmael will come together to bury Abraham. And so we continue to see that played out in there. True or false? Abraham and Sarah had a good marriage. I got heads nodding, I got heads shaking no, and I got a head here going, I saw you. You know, what is a good marriage? I think it is love, but it's also commitment. And that is one of the major parts of this. There were good times and there were bad times. There were failures and there were successes. But I think overall we would have to say that they had a good marriage, even though it was not without challenge or any kind of struggle. I'm going to stop. He starts getting kind of crazy with some of his questions on this. He gets into the thing of submission and wives, but I'm not going to go there because I got to drive away from here with my wife, and I don't want to have had that discussion. We'll talk about that scripture that is often used out of context, and that is, wives, submit to your husbands. As the church is to submit to Christ. Did Christ do anything for his bride? Are we worthy of him dying for us? So if husbands are willing to go as far as Christ, no woman should ever have a problem submitting to their husband because it would fit together. But we have to realize neither one of us are doing what is being asked of us. And that's the challenge that we have. Again, live in the promise. The last thing I'm going to finish up on, that discussion that took place at the city gate had all these witnesses there. When you got married, did you have a witness? And what is that witness's role? That's all it is today, is sign the certificate and stand over to the side. The purpose of the witness was to hold them accountable. And when they sit there and go, we're not getting along, the witness came in and tried to keep them together, to deal with things. We don't do that. We do not hold people accountable. We're not getting the support from the witnesses. We're on our own. And so it changes the dynamics of the relationships. And so I would encourage you to hold people accountable for doing what they say they are going to do. Because I think the clause was, for better or for worse, till death do us part. And now, if it gets really worse, I guess she could kill you, and then that would end that. But anyway, there's a whole discussion on murder, too, that we have to deal with. Any other observations, or as Tom likes to talk about, takeaways from chapter 22 that you have?
That was one of the themes of my devotionals this week was the greater the submission, the greater the blessing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you go along that theme and you think about that as you read God's Word and live your life.
But doing the submission, that's the challenge.
Makes it easier. I mean, our witness in our waiting room, once he took them cuffs off, I realized it was going to get better.
Any other takeaways? I want to encourage you this week to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I do think we're at a pivot point. We've probably hit those throughout my life. I think one of the first things in a political arena that I remember is Alice and I waking up to a radio to go to work. It just came off the radio, and it was the failed attempt to get the hostages out of Iran, and the helicopters had crashed. That was my first awareness with her. In college, my first awareness was criticisms of the Shah of Iran being so brutal with the people of Iran, and the U.S. supporting the Shah. I guess I'm saying all that. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, found many years before I was born, not many, but years before I was born, but didn't really come to light until I was around. And so that whole revelation has enlightened me and shaped me. We're just living in a very ripe time. And while it could be unnerving, I'm hoping that you see it as an encouragement, because at this point, Abraham has not possessed the land. He only owns a gravesite. And here, 4,000 years later, they still have not possessed the land, but it is promised of God. And that should be enough for me to have some security and rest. It's just knowing that he's in charge and it's on his timetable. All right, nothing else. We're dismissed. Wish you the very best. And as far as I know, Tom will be back next week.